The sound of shattering glass silenced the entire room. In the reflection of the polished mahogany bar, Dante Moretti didn't just see a clumsy waitress dropping a tray. He saw fear. Pure, unadulterated terror. He watched as the man in the cheap leather jacket, a nobody named Rick, dug his fingers into the waitress's bruised arm, his whisper hissing like a snake in the quiet lounge. Rick thought he was the predator in that room. He didn't realize he had just walked into the lion's den. Dante swirled the amber liquid in his glass, his eyes darkening. Nobody touches what belongs to the Moretti family, even if she didn't know she belonged to him yet. The Onyx Room was the kind of establishment where secrets were currency and silence was a luxury only the rich could afford. Located in the heart of downtown Chicago, it was a sanctuary for politicians, CEOs, and men who operated in the gray areas of the law. The lighting was always low, the jazz always soft, and the clientele always dangerous. Sophie usually felt invisible here, which was exactly how she liked it. At 23, Sophie had mastered the art of blending into the background. She wore her uniform, a crisp black button-down and a knee-length skirt, like armor. If she kept her head down, delivered the drinks on time, and didn't make eye contact, she could survive another shift. She needed the tips. She needed the safety. Table 4 needs a refill on the scotch. The 25-year-old McCallan, the floor manager, a nervous man named Mr. Henderson, snapped as he walked past the service station. And Sophie? Try to smile? You look like you're attending a funeral. Yes, Mr. Henderson, Sophie murmured, though the comparison wasn't far off. Her life felt like a funeral lately. A long, slow mourning for the freedom she had lost 6 months ago when she made the mistake of dating Rick. She loaded the heavy crystal tumbler onto her tray and took a deep breath. She navigated the floor with practiced grace, weaving between velvet armchairs and heavy oak tables. The air smelled of expensive cigars and old leather. She approached table 4, the most secluded booth in the house. It was permanently reserved, though it sat empty most nights. Tonight, however, it was occupied. The man sitting there was alone. He hadn't touched his phone, hadn't glanced at the menu, and hadn't looked at anyone who walked by. He was just waiting. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Sophie's tuition debt, tailored to fit broad shoulders that seemed to fill the booth. His dark hair was swept back, revealing a face that was too sharp to be handsome in a traditional sense. It was striking, predatory. Sophie felt a shiver run down her spine as she approached. She had served dangerous men before, but this man felt different. He felt like gravity. "Your scotch, sir," Sophie said, her voice barely a whisper. She set the glass down on the coaster with a trembling hand. The man didn't look at the drink. He looked at her hand, specifically at the faint, yellowing bruise peeking out from the cuff of her sleeve. Sophie instinctively tugged her sleeve down, her heart hammering against her ribs. The man's eyes lifted to meet hers. They were dark, almost black, and terrifyingly intelligent. "Thank you," he said. His voice was deep, a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. He didn't look away. He didn't leer like the other customers. He studied her, like she was a puzzle he was trying to solve in real time. "Is there anything else I can get you?" Sophie asked, taking a half step back. "No," the man said, his gaze dropping back to her wrist, lingering there for a second too long. "That'll be all. For now." Sophie retreated to the bar, her breath catching in her throat. She didn't know who he was. The staff only referred to him as the landlord, a joke because he seemed to own the space he occupied. But as she washed glasses at the sink, she couldn't shake the feeling of his eyes on her back. She didn't know that Dante Moretti, the underboss of the Chicago outfit, wasn't just looking at her. He was memorizing her, and he was wondering who had put that bruise on her wrist. The night wore on, the usual rhythm of clinking glasses and low chatter lulling Sophie into a false sense of security. She was calculating her tips in her head, enough to pay the electric bill, maybe enough to buy groceries for the week, when the heavy oak doors at the front of the lounge swung open. The air in the room shifted. It wasn't the arrival of a VIP. It was the intrusion of chaos. Sophie froze. She knew that walk. She knew that cheap leather jacket. It was Rick. He shouldn't be here. The bouncers were supposed to keep riffraff out, especially without a reservation. But Rick was charming when he wanted to be, and he was a liar of the highest order. He scanned the room, his eyes manic, until they locked onto her. Sophie's blood turned to ice. She ducked behind the espresso machine, praying he hadn't seen her, but the smirk on his face told her it was too late. Rick didn't care about the ambiance. He didn't care that he was walking past federal judges and high-ranking captains of industry. He marched straight toward the bar, his boots heavy on the plush carpet. He looked out of place, a stain on a pristine painting. Sophie stepped out from behind the machine, trying to intercept him before he made a scene. If she caused a scene, Mr. Henderson would fire her. If she lost this job, she lost her apartment. If she lost her apartment, Rick won. "Rick," she hissed, meeting him halfway near the service station. "You can't be here. You need to leave." Rick laughed, a harsh, grating sound that drew a few irritated glances from nearby tables. He looked worse than the last time she'd seen him. His eyes were bloodshot, his jaw unshaven. He smelled of stale beer and desperation. "Is that how you greet your boyfriend, Soph?" Rick slurred slightly, leaning in too close. "Ex-boyfriend," she corrected, stepping back. "We broke up 3 months ago. Please, Rick, I'm working." "Working?" Rick sneered, looking her up and down. "Yeah, prancing around in a short skirt for these rich scumbags. You think you're better than me now?" "I don't think I'm better than anyone. I'm just trying to do my job. Please, just go." "I'm not going anywhere until you give me what you owe me." Rick's voice rose. The veneer of charm was cracking, revealing the aggression underneath. "I don't owe you anything," Sophie whispered, tears pricking her eyes. "I paid your rent for 6 months. I paid your bail. I have nothing left." "You have tips," Rick said, glancing at the apron tied around her waist. "And I have a debt that's due tonight. A real nasty debt, Soph. These guys, they don't play. I need $500. Now. I don't have $500. Don't lie to me," Rick shouted. The jazz band didn't stop playing, but the conversation in the room died. Heads turned. Mr. Henderson was hurrying over from the host stand, looking pale. "Rick, please," Sophie begged, her hands shaking. "You're making a scene." "I'll show you a scene," Rick snarled. He reached out and grabbed her wrist, the same wrist with the fading bruise. He squeezed hard, twisting the skin. Sophie gasped, a sharp cry of pain escaping her lips. "Let go! You're hurting me!" "Give me the cash, Sophie, or I swear to God I will drag you out of here and—" "Sir!" Mr. Henderson arrived, looking terrified, but trying to sound authoritative. "You need to release my employee and leave the premises immediately, or I will call the police." Rick turned his aggression toward the manager. "Back off, old man. This is a domestic dispute. It's none of your business." "It is my business when you are assaulting my staff in my establishment," Henderson squeaked. Rick shoved Henderson backward, sending the small man stumbling into a waiter carrying a tray of martinis. The crash was deafening. Glass shattered everywhere. Olives and vodka sprayed across the floor. Silence descended. Absolute, terrifying silence. Rick seemed to realize he had crossed a line. He looked around, seeing the disgust and anger on the faces of the patrons. But instead of retreating, his humiliation turned into dangerous rage. He turned back to Sophie, his eyes wild. "You did this," he spat. "You embarrassed me." He raised his hand, his fist clenched. Sophie flinched, closing her eyes, waiting for the blow that she knew was coming. She had felt it before. She knew the sting, the heat, the shame. But the blow never landed. Instead, a voice cut through the air. It wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that made the floorboards tremble. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." Sophie opened her eyes. Dante Moretti was standing. He hadn't moved hurriedly. He stood by his booth, one hand casually in his pocket, the other holding his Scotch glass. He looked bored almost, but the air around him crackled with violence. Rick blinked, looking at the man in the charcoal suit. Rick was a bully, and like most bullies, he had no survival instinct when it came to true predators. "Mind your own business, rich boy. This doesn't concern you." Dante took a slow step forward, then another. The crowd parted for him, like the Red Sea. He moved with the fluid lethality of a panther stalking a wounded gazelle. "You're in my bar," Dante said calmly, closing the distance, "harassing my employee, breaking my glassware." He stopped 3 feet from Rick, towering over him. Dante was 6'4" of pure muscle, concealed by Italian tailoring. Rick was barely 5'10". "I'd say that makes it my business," Rick scoffed, though he released Sophie's wrist. He tried to puff out his chest. "You own this place? Then tell your waitress to pay her debts. She owes me." Dante's gaze flicked to Sophie. He saw the fresh red marks on her wrist, overlaying the old bruise. His jaw tightened, a small muscle feathering near his ear. That was the only sign of his fury. "She owes you nothing," Dante said. "But you owe me an apology for ruining my evening." "Screw you!" Rick spat. He threw a wild punch, a clumsy, desperate haymaker aimed at Dante's jaw. It was a mistake. Dante didn't even spill his drink. He sidestepped the punch with lazy elegance, caught Rick's wrist with his free hand, and twisted. There was a sickening pop. Rick screamed, dropping to his knees as his shoulder was wrenched out of its socket. Dante held him there, pinned by one hand, looking down at him with cold indifference. "I despise bad manners," Dante whispered. 2 men in dark suits materialized from the shadows near the kitchen. Sophie recognized them vaguely. They usually sat at the bar, never drinking, always watching. They were Dante's security. "Get this trash out of my sight," Dante ordered, releasing Rick. The ex-boyfriend collapsed to the floor, sobbing and clutching his arm. "Wait," Rick whimpered, as the guards hoisted him up by his armpits. "You don't understand. I owe money to the Scarpia crew. If I don't pay, they'll kill me. She has to pay." Dante froze. The room went cold. "Scarpia?" Dante repeated. He looked at Rick with renewed interest. "You owe money to Vinnie Scarpia?" "Yeah," Rick panted, tears streaming down his face. $5 grand. I just needed 500 to pay the interest so they wouldn't break my legs tonight." Dante looked at Sophie. She was shaking, clutching her wrist, looking from Rick to Dante with wide, terrified eyes. She looked like a rabbit trapped between a wolf and a bear. Dante turned back to his men. "Take him to the back office. Don't throw him out yet." "What?" Rick stammered. "No, let me go." "You're not going anywhere," Dante said, his voice dropping to a register that promised pain. "If you owe Scarpia, that means you owe the outfit. And since I run the outfit's operations in this district, it seems your debt has just been transferred." Rick's face went pale. He finally realized who was standing in front of him. You're Moretti." "Oh, God." The guards dragged Rick away, his boots squeaking on the vodka-soaked floor. The doors to the back office slammed shut. Dante turned to the room. "Drinks are on the house for the next hour," he announced to the stunned patrons. "My apologies for the disturbance." As the chatter slowly resumed, nervous, excited whispers about what they had just witnessed, Dante turned his full attention to Sophie. She was backed against the bar, trembling. "Come with me," he said. It wasn't a request. "I can't," Sophie stammered. Mr. Henderson isn't your boss right now," Dante said, stepping closer. He reached out, and for a second Sophie flinched. Dante paused, his hand hovering in the air. He slowly, gently, reached past her defense and took her hand. His grip was warm, firm, and surprisingly tender. He lifted her wrist to inspect the damage. "I am," Dante said softly. "Come with me, Sophie. We have things to discuss." The walk to the back office felt like a funeral procession, but for whom? Sophie wasn't entirely sure. Dante Moretti's hand remained on the small of her back, a scorching weight through the thin fabric of her uniform. It wasn't a shove, nor was it a caress. It was a brand. It told every employee, every guard, and every shadow in the hallway that she was under his protection. Sophie kept her head down, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She had worked at the Onyx Room for 8 months, yet she had never seen this part of the building. The hallway was lined with black and white photographs of Chicago from the 1920s, grim-faced men in fedoras standing in front of warehouses. It was a silent history lesson on the lineage of the man walking beside her. "Leo," Dante said, his voice cutting through the silence without raising a decibel. One of the large guards who had been flanking them stepped forward. "Boss, get the first aid kit from the supply closet, bring the good whiskey, and make sure nobody disturbs us unless the building is on fire." "Understood." Dante stopped at a heavy oak door at the end of the hall. He keyed in a code on a digital pad, the modern technology stark against the old-world aesthetic. The lock clicked with a heavy thud, and he pushed the door open. The office was less of a workspace and more of a fortress. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Chicago skyline, the city lights glittering like diamonds on black velvet. But Sophie didn't look at the view. She looked at Rick. Rick was slumped in a leather chair in the corner, guarded by the second enforcer, Marco. Rick's face was already swelling, his left eye shut, his arm cradled awkwardly against his chest. When he saw Sophie enter, he flinched, as if expecting her to hit him. The pathetic sight of him, the man who had terrorized her for 2 years, who had made her flinch at the sound of a closing door, suddenly looked small. Dante guided Sophie to a plush velvet sofa on the opposite side of the room, far away from Rick. "Sit," Dante commanded gently. Sophie sat, her knees pressed together, her hands gripping her skirt. She watched as Dante walked to his massive mahogany desk, removed his suit jacket, and draped it over the back of his chair. Underneath, he wore a crisp white shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle and inked with faint, intricate tattoos. He poured a glass of amber liquid from a crystal decanter. He walked over to Rick. Rick whimpered. "Mr. Moretti, please. I didn't know she was yours. I swear." Dante stared at him, taking a slow sip of the whiskey. "She isn't mine," Dante said, his voice dangerously calm. "She is a person, a woman working a shift. That you thought you could walk into my house and treat her like cattle is what offends me." Dante turned his back on Rick, dismissing him as if he were a piece of furniture, and walked over to Sophie. He knelt on one knee in front of her. The change in his demeanor was jarring. The cold, lethal predator vanished, replaced by something intense and focused. "Drink," he said, offering the glass. "I don't drink on the job," Sophie whispered, her voice trembling. "You aren't on the job anymore. You're done for the night." He pressed the glass into her hands. "It will help with the shock." Sophie took a small sip. The liquid burned her throat, but the warmth spread quickly to her freezing extremities. Leo entered the room then, placing a white metal box on the coffee table before retreating to stand by the door. Dante opened the kit. His hands, large and capable of snapping bones, moved with surgical precision as he selected an antiseptic wipe and a bandage. "Give me your wrist." Sophie hesitated. The shame of the bruises was deep. They were marks of her own stupidity, evidence that she had let a monster into her life. "It's nothing. I'm fine." Dante didn't ask again. He reached out and took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. He unbuttoned the cuff of her shirt and rolled it up. The silence in the room was deafening. Even Rick stopped whimpering. Dante stared at the mottled skin, yellow and green from old grips, bright red from tonight. He traced the path of a vein with his index finger, his touch so light it made Sophie's breath hitch. "He did this?" Dante asked. He didn't look at Rick. He looked only at the bruise. "The old ones, yes," Sophie admitted, unable to lie to those dark eyes. "The red ones are from tonight." "And before?" Dante asked, dipping a cotton ball in antiseptic. "Did he hit you?" Sophie looked away, staring at the Persian rug. "Sometimes, when he lost money, when he was drunk." Dante cleaned her wrist. The sting was sharp, but his grip was an anchor. "Why didn't you go to the police?" "Rick's cousin is a sergeant in the 12th district," Sophie murmured, "and I didn't think anyone would believe me. I'm nobody. He has a way of making everything sound like it's my fault." Dante finished wrapping her wrist in clean gauze. He secured the clip, then stayed kneeling for a moment. He looked up at her, his face hard as stone. "You are not nobody," Dante said fiercely, "and you will never be touched by him again." He stood up, the tenderness vanishing instantly. He turned to the corner of the room. "Marco, tie him to the chair." Rick began to struggle. No, wait, I can pay. I just need time." "You're out of time," Dante said, walking toward the desk. He picked up a heavy file folder and tossed it aside, sitting on the edge of the desk, looking down at Rick. "Now, let's talk about Vinnie Scarpia." The mention of Vinnie Scarpia changed the temperature in the room. In Chicago, there were two main factions of the outfit. There was the Moretti family, Dante's family, who controlled the North Side, the unions, and the high-end gambling. They were known for being businessmen first, gangsters second. They had rules. Then there was the Scarpia crew on the South Side. They were animals. They dealt in things the Morettis wouldn't touch: trafficking, heavy narcotics, and predatory loans that were designed to never be paid off. "Talk," Dante said. "How much do you owe Vinnie?" Rick was sweating profusely, the salty droplets stinging his bruised eye. $5,000. I borrowed it for a venture." "A venture?" Dante scoffed. "You mean a poker game in a basement in Cicero?" "I was going to win it back," Rick shouted, desperate. "I had a system, but the game was rigged." "The game is always rigged, you moron," Dante said boredly. $5,000 is nothing. I have that in my pocket." "Why is Vinnie threatening to break your legs over $5,000? He usually waits until the debt hits 20. Rick went silent. He looked at the floor. He looked at the ceiling. He looked anywhere but at Sophie. Dante's eyes narrowed. He possessed an uncanny ability to smell a lie, a trait inherited from his father, the Don. He walked over to Rick, grabbed him by the lapels of his cheap jacket, and slammed him back against the chair. "What else?" Dante growled. "What aren't you telling me?" "I didn't have any collateral," Rick blubbered. "Vinnie wouldn't give me the loan without a co-signer, without a guarantee." Sophie felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. She set the whiskey glass down, her hands shaking so hard she feared she'd drop it. "What did you do, Rick?" Sophie whispered. Rick looked at her, his face a mask of pathetic guilt. "I used your identity." The room spun. "What?" "I stole your passport and your social security card last month," Rick confessed, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I gave them to Vinny's loan shark. I told them you were my wife, that you had an inheritance coming." Dante went rigid. He released Rick slowly, stepping back as if touching filth. "You put her up as collateral?" Dante asked, his voice barely audible. "I was going to pay it back," Rick screamed. "But then the interest, it doubled every week. Now they say I owe 15 grand. And yesterday Vinny told me if I didn't pay by midnight tonight, they were going to collect from the cosigner." Dante looked at the clock on the wall. It was 11:45 p.m. "They're coming for her," Dante realized. "They aren't looking for you anymore, Rick. They know you're a deadbeat. They're looking for the fresh meat." Sophie stood up, panic seizing her throat. "I have to go. I have to go home. I have to pack." "Sit down," Dante barked. Sophie froze. Dante took a deep breath, running a hand through his hair. He turned to Marco. "Get the car around back. The SUV, armored." "Boss?" Marco asked. "Scarpia isn't going to send a lawyer. He's going to send a grab team. If they think she has money, or if they think she can work off the debt in one of their brothels, they will be at her apartment right now." Sophie let out a choked sob. The reality of her situation was crashing down on her. She was a waitress. She worried about rent and tips. Now she was a target for the Southside Mafia because of a man she had tried to save. Dante walked over to her. He didn't touch her this time. He simply stood in her space, blocking out the rest of the room. "Sophie, look at me." She looked up. His eyes were hard, serious. "You cannot go home. Do you understand? Your apartment is burned. If you go there, they will take you." "But I have nowhere else to go," she cried. "My cat is there. My clothes." "We will get the cat," Dante said firmly. "Leo will handle it. But you are not going there." He turned back to Rick. Rick was watching them, with a mix of fear and confusion. "What about me?" Rick asked. "If you protect her, they'll come for me again." Dante smiled. It was a terrifying, mirthless smile. "Oh, Rick, you have a much bigger problem than the Scarpias now." Dante walked to his desk, pulled out a checkbook, and scribbled a number. He ripped the check out. $15,000, Dante said, holding the paper up. "Leo, tomorrow morning, you deliver this to Vinny Scarpia personally. Tell him I am buying the debt. Tell him the girl is off limits. Tell him she is under the Moretti flag." "You're paying it?" Rick's jaw dropped. "You're paying my debt." "I'm not paying your debt," Dante corrected. "I'm buying it. Which means you now owe me $15,000. Rick's relief vanished. Everyone in Chicago knew that owing the bank was bad, owing Scarpia was worse, but owing Dante Moretti, that was eternal. "Take him to the warehouse on the docks," Dante ordered Marco. "Put him in a cell. He works it off. Loading crates, scrubbing floors. I don't care if it takes him 10 years. He doesn't see sunlight until every cent is paid back with interest." "No, you can't do this!" Rick screamed as Marco hauled him up. "I just saved your life," Dante said coldly. "Be grateful." Marco dragged a kicking and screaming Rick out of the office. The heavy door slammed shut, cutting off his protests. Suddenly, the room was quiet again. Just Dante and Sophie. Sophie felt lightheaded. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do that? That's so much money." "It's pocket change to me," Dante said, adjusting his cuffs. "But it buys me something valuable." "What?" "It buys me the right to interfere." He walked over to the coat rack and grabbed a long, heavy trench coat. his own. He draped it over Sophie's shoulders. It engulfed her, smelling of expensive cologne and tobacco. "Sophie, listen to me carefully," Dante said. "Paying the debt stops Scarpia from hurting you legally. But Vinny is a pig. If he sees something he wants, he tries to take it. He's seen your picture. He knows where you live. He won't respect the payoff immediately. He will test me. So what do? You're coming with me." "With you?" Sophie blinked. "To your house. To my penthouse. It's the only place in the city with security tight enough to guarantee your safety tonight." "I can't." Sophie shook her head, backing away. "I don't even know you. You're one of them." Dante stepped closer, cornering her against the sofa. He placed a hand on the wall beside her head, leaning down so their faces were inches apart. "I am exactly one of them," he murmured. "I am the worst of them, which is why I am the only one who can keep you safe from the wolves. You have two choices, Sophie. You can walk out that door, take your chances with the Scarpia crew waiting at your apartment, and likely end up in a shipping container bound for overseas." He paused, letting the horror of that sink in. "Or," he continued, his voice dropping to a velvety rasp, "you can trust the devil you know. Come home with me. Sleep in a guest room with a lock on the door. Let me handle this." Sophie looked into his eyes. She saw danger, yes, but she also saw the man who had cleaned her wrist with the gentleness of a doctor. She saw the man who had just spent $15,000 to save her from slavery. She took a shaky breath. She was terrified of him, but she was more terrified of the world outside. "Okay," she whispered. Dante nodded once, satisfied. He offered her his arm. "Let's go. Keep your head down. Don't look at anyone on the way out." They walked out of the office, down the hall, and out the back exit into the biting Chicago wind. A massive black SUV was idling in the alley, exhaust plumbing into the cold night air. As Dante opened the door for her, Sophie paused. She looked back at the brick wall of the club, realizing her life as a simple waitress was over. She had just made a deal with the King of Chicago. She slid into the leather seat. Dante climbed in beside her, the lock clicking shut with a sound of finality. "Home," Dante told the driver. The car peeled away into the darkness, carrying Sophie away from her past and straight into the heart of the Mafia. The elevator ride to the penthouse was a study in silence. It was a private lift, gold-plated and mirrored, reflecting Sophie's disheveled state against Dante's immaculate composure. She saw herself, a waitress in a stained uniform, hair messy, wrist bandaged, standing next to a god of the underworld. When the doors slid open, Sophie stepped into a world she had only seen in movies. Dante's penthouse was a fortress of glass and steel perched atop the city. The living room was cavernous, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the Chicago skyline. The furniture was modern, Italian, and stark. There were no personal photos, no knickknacks, no signs of life. It was a beautiful, cold museum. "Take your shoes off," Dante said, kicking off his own dress shoes near the door. "The floors are heated." Sophie obeyed, her toes curling against the warm marble. It was a small comfort in a terrifying situation. "Are you hungry?" Dante asked, walking toward a kitchen that looked like it belonged in a Michelin star restaurant. "I couldn't eat," Sophie said, hugging the oversized trench coat tighter around herself. "I feel like I'm going to throw up." Dante paused. He opened the refrigerator, grabbed a bottle of sparkling water, and set it on the island. Adrenaline crash. It happens. You need sugar. He found an apple, sliced it with a knife that looked dangerously sharp, and slid the plate toward her. "Eat." Sophie approached the island tentatively. She took a slice of apple. Her hand was still shaking. "So," she whispered, the sound swallowed by the massive room. What happens now? Do I work for you now, to pay off the 15,000? Dante leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. He studied her with that same intensity he had shown at the bar. You think I brought you here to be a maid? I don't know what you want, Sophie admitted, her voice cracking. Rich men don't do favors for waitresses. Not without a price. Dante's expression darkened. He walked around the island, closing the distance between them. Sophie braced herself, expecting a proposition. Instead, he reached out and adjusted the coat on her shoulders, pulling it closed where it had slipped. You have a very low opinion of men, Sophie. And looking at your ex, I can see why. His voice was low, rumbling through her chest. But let me be clear. You are not a servant here. You are a guest. You will sleep in the guest suite down the hall. It has a lock. You will use it. And the money? Consider it an investment. In what? In order, Dante said cryptically. I hate chaos. Rick was chaos. Scarpia is chaos. Eliminating them from your life brings order to mine. It's worth the money. He turned away, dismissing the topic. Go shower. You smell like stale beer and fear. You'll find fresh clothes in the closet. They were my sister's, from when she visits. They should fit. Sophie nodded, feeling dismissed. She walked down the long, gallery-like hallway until she found the door he had indicated. Inside, the guest room was larger than her entire apartment. The bed was a cloud of white linens. The bathroom was spa-like, with a tub deep enough to swim in. Sophie locked the door, twice, and stripped off her uniform. She threw the clothes in the trash. She never wanted to see them again. As she stood under the scalding hot water, scrubbing the scent of the bar from her skin, she cried. She cried for the fear, for the humiliation of Rick selling her out, and for the terrifying uncertainty of her future. She was safe, yes, but she was trapped in a glass castle with a wolf. While Sophie showered, Dante retreated to his study. He didn't turn on the lights. He sat in his leather chair, the city glow illuminating the room. He unlocked the bottom drawer of his desk and pulled out a thick, weathered file. He opened it. On top was a photograph from 15 years ago. It showed two men standing in front of a warehouse. One was Dante's father, the Don. The other was a man with kind eyes and a weary smile. Dante traced the face of the second man. You have his eyes, Sophie, Dante whispered to the empty room. He picked up his phone and dialed a number. It rang once before being answered. Yeah? A gruff voice answered. It was Leo, his head of security. Did you secure her apartment? Dante asked. Just in time, boss. Two of Scarpia's guys were kicking down the door when we rolled up. We discouraged them. Did you find the box? Yeah, under the floorboards in the bedroom. Just like you said it would be. Good, Dante exhaled, leaning back. Bring it here. And Leo? If Scarpia asks, we don't know anything about a box. We just took the girl for the debt. Understood. Boss, does she know? No, Dante said, glancing toward the hallway where Sophie was. She thinks she's just a waitress with bad luck. She has no idea who her father really was. She's going to find out eventually. Scarpia isn't chasing her for the 15 grand, Dante. He's chasing the ledger her old man stole. I know, Dante said, his voice turning into a growl. That's why she stays with me. Nobody touches her. Nobody touches the daughter of the ghost. Dante hung up. He looked back at the photo. Sophie wasn't a charity case. She was the daughter of the most legendary hitman the Chicago outfit had ever known, a man who had vanished 10 years ago with the outfit's darkest secrets. And Dante was the only one who knew she existed. The next morning, The sun assaulted the penthouse with blinding brilliance. Sophie woke up in the massive bed, disoriented. For a split second, she thought she was back in her cramped studio apartment. Then she saw the silk sheets and the view of Lake Michigan, and the memory of the previous night crashed down on her. She found the clothes Dante had mentioned, a pair of soft grey sweatpants and a cashmere sweater that cost more than her car. They were slightly too big, swallowing her petite frame, but they were comfortable. She walked out into the living room. The smell of coffee and bacon filled the air. Dante was in the kitchen, dressed in casual wear, black jeans and a black t-shirt that hugged his chest. He looked less like a corporate shark and more like a brawler this morning. He was cooking. "You cook?" Sophie asked, standing by the doorway. Dante didn't look up from the skillet. "My mother insisted that if I was going to run the family, I had to know how to feed them. Sit, eat." He plated eggs and bacon and set them down. Sophie sat. The dynamic was strange, domestic, yet charged with tension. "We have a problem," Dante said, sitting opposite her with black coffee. Sophie's fork froze. "The money? Did the check bounce?" "The check cleared. Scarpia took the money," Dante said. "But he's not satisfied. My men went to your apartment last night to get your things." "My cat!" Sophie gasped. "Barnaby! The cat is fine. He's in the laundry room with a bowl of tuna. He's fat and happy." Sophie let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. "Thank you. Thank you so much." "But," Dante continued, his eyes serious, "my men found something else. Or rather, they interrupted something. Scarpia's men weren't just looking for you to pay a debt, Sophie. They were tearing your apartment apart. They were ripping up floorboards, cutting open the mattress." Sophie frowned. "Why? I don't have anything valuable. I'm broke." "That's what I need to know." Dante leaned forward. "Think, Sophie. Did your father ever leave you anything? A box? A key? A stack of papers?" "My dad?" Sophie looked down. "My dad died when I was 12. Car accident. He was a salesman. He didn't leave anything except a life insurance policy that paid for my braces." Dante studied her face. She was telling the truth. She didn't know. "A salesman," Dante repeated flatly. "Traveling?" "Yes." "He was gone a lot." "Look, what does this have to do with Scarpia?" "Everything." Dante stood up. "Get your shoes on. We're going out." "Out? You said it wasn't safe." "It's not safe to be alone. It's perfectly safe when you're with me. I need to show you something." 10 minutes later, they were in the armored SUV again, Marco driving and Leo in the passenger seat. Dante sat in the back with Sophie. The car wound its way through the city, heading toward the industrial district. They pulled up to a nondescript storage facility. Dante led her to a unit on the 3rd floor. He unlocked it. Inside, there were stacks of boxes, but in the center of the room sat a single, beat-up leather trunk. "Do you recognize this?" Dante asked. Sophie walked closer. A memory flickered. "That was in our attic when I was a kid. Dad used to keep his winter gear in it." "Open it," Dante said. Sophie unlatched the trunk. It wasn't empty. Inside, there was a stack of cash, old bills, bound in rubber bands. There must have been $50,000 there, and beneath the cash, a gun. A silver 1911 pistol, polished and oiled, and beneath that, a black ledger book. "What is this?" Sophie backed away, terrified. "That's a gun! Why did my dad have a gun?" "Your dad wasn't a salesman, Sophie," Dante said softly, standing behind her. "His name wasn't Thomas Miller. His name was Thomas the Ghost, Mancini. He was the best enforcer the Moretti family ever had." Sophie spun around. "You're lying. My dad was kind. He coached my soccer team." "He was both," Dante said. He was a good father, but he was also a man who knew where all the bodies were buried. Literally. 10 years ago, he realized the life was getting too dangerous. He wanted out. He stole that ledger, which contains proof of every payoff, every murder, every bribe the Scarpia family ever made, and he used it as insurance to disappear. He changed his name. He became a salesman. Sophie felt the room spinning. Her entire life was a lie. So Scarpia isn't looking for Rick's money, Dante confirmed. Rick just put you on their radar. Once they ran your name, they realized who you were. They want the ledger. If that book gets out, Vinny Scarpia goes to prison for life, and his entire empire crumbles. Suddenly, the sound of screeching tires echoed outside the storage unit building. Leo's voice crackled over Dante's earpiece. "Boss! We've got company! 3 SUVs, heavy hitters! It's a setup!" Dante grabbed Sophie's arm. "Leave the box. We have to move. Now." "But the ledger." "Forget it. Your life is the priority." Dante pulled her out of the unit, slamming the door. They ran down the metal corridor. Gunfire erupted from the stairwell at the end of the hall. Bullets pinged off the metal lockers, sparks flying. Sophie screamed, ducking. Dante shoved her behind a concrete pillar. He pulled a handgun from a holster at the small of his back, a movement so smooth it was blurred. He fired 2 shots down the hall. A man screamed and fell. "Stay down!" Dante roared. "We're trapped!" Sophie cried, looking at the stairwell filled with Scarpia's men. "Not yet." Dante looked at her. "Do you trust me?" "I don't have a choice." "Good answer." Dante grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall. "When I throw this, you run for the fire escape on the left. Don't look back." Dante pulled the pin on the extinguisher and hurled it down the hall. He fired a single shot at it. The extinguisher exploded in a cloud of white chemical fog, blinding the attackers. "Run!" They sprinted. Sophie's lungs burned. She could hear shouting and blind gunfire behind them. They burst out onto the metal fire escape, the cold wind whipping her hair. They were 3 stories up. Below in the alley, more men were pouring out of cars. "We can't go down," Dante realized. He looked up. "We go up, to the roof." They scrambled up the ladder. Dante moved behind her, shielding her body with his own. They reached the gravel rooftop just as the metal door below them banged open. They were cornered on the roof. The only way down was a fire jump to the next building, a gap of about 6 feet. "Dante!" Sophie panted, looking at the gap. "I can't jump that." "Yes, you can." Dante grabbed her face in his hands. His eyes were wild, fierce. "You are Thomas Mancini's daughter. Survival is in your blood. Look at me. You are not a victim, Sophie. Jump!" Bullets began to chew up the gravel around their feet. Sophie looked at the gap. Then she looked at Dante. Something inside her snapped. The fear didn't vanish, but it turned into fuel. The invisible waitress died in that moment. She backed up 3 steps, sprinted, and launched herself into the air. She landed hard on the neighboring roof, rolling on the tar paper, scraping her hands. She scrambled up and turned back. Dante jumped right after her, landing gracefully. He grabbed her hand immediately, pulling her toward the roof access door of the new building. "Leo is bringing the car around to the next block," Dante shouted into his phone. "We're coming down the north side." As they rushed down the stairs of the safe building, Sophie realized her heart wasn't just pounding from fear. It was pounding from the thrill. She looked at her hands, scraped and dirty. "You knew him," Sophie said, breathless as they descended the stairs. "My father. You knew him well." "He saved my life when I was 18, Dante said, kicking open the exit door to the street. The armored SUV screeched to a halt in front of them. "And I swore to him that if anything ever happened, I would watch over you. I've been keeping tabs on you for years, Sophie. from a distance. They dove into the car. Marco floored it, tires smoking as they sped away from the ambush. Sophie slumped back in the seat, adrenaline fading into shock. She looked at Dante. He was checking his magazine, reloading his weapon. "You've been watching me?" she asked. "Since the day he died," Dante admitted. "But I couldn't get close. If I got close, Scarpia would know you existed. I had to stay away to keep you safe. Until Rick." "Until Rick," Sophie repeated, bitter laughter bubbling up. "The idiot ex-boyfriend who accidentally started a war." "The war was always coming, Sophie," Dante said, reaching out to take her bruised hand. He laced his fingers with hers, holding tight. "Rick just struck the match. But don't worry. I'm going to burn Scarpia's whole world down before I let him touch you again." Sophie looked at their joined hands. She realized then that she wasn't going back to the bar. She wasn't going back to her apartment. She was in this now, fully. "Show me how to use it," Sophie said, looking at the gun on the seat. Dante looked at her, surprise registering in his dark eyes. Then a slow, dangerous smile spread across his face. "Okay," he said. "First lesson starts tonight." 3 weeks later, the penthouse had transformed from a cold museum into a tactical command center. In the soundproofed basement, Sophie stood with her father's heavy silver 1911 in her hands. "Don't anticipate the recoil," Dante murmured, his chest pressing against her back as he adjusted her grip. "Let it surprise you." Sophie fired. The bullet punched a hole near the target's center. Dante didn't step away. The tension that had been building for weeks, through the fear, the planning, and the forced proximity, finally snapped. He spun her around and kissed her, a desperate, claiming collision that erased the memory of every man who had ever made her feel small. For the first time, Sophie didn't feel like a victim, standing in the arms of the city's most dangerous predator. She felt powerful. The moment shattered when Dante's phone buzzed. It was Leo. "Scarpia got desperate," Dante said, his face hardening back into stone. "He couldn't find the ledger, so he grabbed Rick. He's using him as bait." "I'm coming with you," Sophie said, sliding a fresh magazine into the gun. When Dante opened his mouth to argue, she cut him off. "I brought Rick into this. I finish it." Dante looked at her, seeing the fire of her father, the ghost in her eyes. He handed her a Kevlar vest. "Stay behind me." They hit the old meatpacking plant at 2 a.m. Dante's team breached the doors with flashbangs, clearing the outer guards with terrifying efficiency. They burst into the main processing room to find a gruesome scene. Rick was tied to a chair, beaten beyond recognition. Vinny Scarpia stood behind him, pressing a gun to Rick's temple, sweat pouring down his face. "Back off, Moretti!" Vinny screamed. "Give me the ledger, or the idiot dies." "He doesn't know where it is, Vinny," Dante said calmly, stepping out from the shadows but keeping his rifle raised. "Thomas Mancini was smarter than you. He didn't trust anyone." Vinny's eyes darted wildly. Panic set in. He swung his weapon away from Rick, aiming wildly at Dante. "Then you die first!" Dante moved to shield Sophie, but he was a fraction of a second too slow. Sophie didn't freeze. She didn't remember the stance or the breathing. She just remembered the threat. She stepped out from behind Dante, raised the silver 1911, and fired. The boom was deafening. Vinny screamed, dropping his gun as a red flower bloomed on his shoulder. He collapsed backward. Dante was on him instantly, boot on his chest, rifle between his eyes. "You're lucky," Dante growled. "She has better aim than her father." The ghost usually went for the head. As police sirens wailed in the distance, Detective Rossi was already en route to take custody of the Scarpia crew. Leo cut Rick loose. The ex-boyfriend looked at Sophie with a mix of gratitude and terror. The shy waitress he had bullied was gone. "Get him a bus ticket," Dante ordered, not even looking at Rick. "Anywhere west of the Mississippi. If he returns to Chicago, nobody saves him." Rick limped into the night, vanishing forever. Dante turned to Sophie, his adrenaline fading into awe. "You stepped in front of the gun. You saved me." "I don't want a safe life, Dante," Sophie whispered, holstering the weapon. "I want this life, with you." The King of Chicago smiled, taking her hand. "Then let's go home. We have a city to run." They walked out of the warehouse together, emerging from the shadows into the blinding lights of the police cruisers. The waitress was dead. Long live the Queen. Wow, talk about a shift change, right? From spilling martinis to taking down mob bosses. Sophie really proved that you should never underestimate the quiet ones. I think the most powerful part of this story isn't just the romance or the action. It's Sophie finding her own strength. Dante didn't save a damsel. He armed a warrior who was already there, just waiting to be woken up by her father's legacy. It makes you wonder, what are you capable of when your back is truly against the wall? If you enjoyed this intense ride through the Chicago underworld, smash that like button. It really helps the channel out. And if you want more stories like this, full of danger, passion, and twists you won't see coming, hit subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Let me know in the comments. Did Rick get off too easy with just a bus ticket out of town? Or was watching Sophie become a queen the ultimate punishment for him? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.